Education opens doors for the gospel, bringing hope to dark places and sparking lasting change around the world. At TeachBeyond, we're reaching the nations through education.
This is Transformed and Transformational, a podcast from TeachBeyond. I'm Kian.
And I'm Heather. We're exploring how the gospel transforms us and overflows to impact classrooms, communities, and the world.
Let's jump into today's conversation. Most of the time on the podcast, we bring on guests to cover a number of different topics, but today we're actually talking about the mission and heart of TeachBeyond, which is reaching the nations through education. So we have David Durance, president of TeachBeyond, joining us today.
And we've used that phrase, reaching the nations through education, here on the podcast week after week. And I'm excited that we actually get to spend some time digging into that deeper today.
Yeah. Jesus left us with the Great Commission, which is from Matthew 28, where Jesus sends out the disciples to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them. And he leaves them and us with the promise that he will be with us to the end of the age.
We're going to hear how TeachBeyond is responding to that Great Commission and what we see as our role in effectively reaching the next generation.
David Durance lives in Atlanta, Georgia, with his wife Nancy, and they have 4 sons ranging from college age to middle school.
He has a PhD in organizational leadership from Columbia International University, as well as a master's in business administration and a degree in biblical studies. After serving as a regional director of Asia for TeachBeyond, David has now been the president since 2019.
David is here to cast vision and share stories about how education opens doors for the gospel.
Let's go over to the conversation with David now. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Good to see you both. Glad to be here.
David, we are so glad to have you. And it's fun to have you. Glad we caught you in the midst. I know you're just traveling around the whole world. I think you've been to almost every continent in the last few weeks, or you're planning on being it. What are you up to these days?
Yeah, I need to get to Australia. This is what's killing me, because then I could just say, other than Antarctica, obviously, I will have been to all the continents in 6 weeks, which is the fastest I've been kind of around the world. And that's exciting stuff. But I couldn't, my family will be happy if I don't sort of try and tuck that in, one of the few days I'm home.
And you've been back home between every one of those trips, is that right?
That's the brilliant thing.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm getting to know the Atlanta airport really well.
There are pros and cons, right? Because it's the back and forth that adds more travel time, but at least you're in your own bed and something familiar before you're back out and traveling somewhere else.
Yeah. I track my sleep score, and I get on average 50% better sleep scores on my own pillow. So
there you go.
Yeah. It's
or you could do what I do, David, and travel with your own pillow. So that's, your other option.
That's my next. I think it's the person beside me that helps me.
There
sleep.
you
It's
go.
not the
There you
pillow
go.
header, I'm afraid. Yeah.
That's great. 6, okay, going as many places as you have. What are you doing in all these trips? Like, what are you seeing? What are you kind of experiencing?
This is like a really interesting moment where we are trying to put down, I guess, the sort of tracks for the future. So a lot of that has to is about gathering people and sharing vision, having a chance to build, on the Jordan, we'll build those rocks and say the Lord is here doing something. So that's what's happening. And it just is happening in different places at a very short time. And being there to be a part of that is really a privilege. And I would say what's so interesting as I see that, as we see different cultures and different people come together, there's so much that's unique, but the similarities are actually shocking. It's amazing to see how God is bringing us together around this new vision. And it's really exciting to be sort of in this moment, seeing that around the world in such a short period of time.
And I feel like when you're in a place, you are not only conveying vision and casting that vision and bringing people together, but also seeing the vision playing out before your very eyes, right? Oh, this helps further my understanding of the theoretical things that I might be casting vision towards. Like, oh, it's happening here. And I knew it was happening here, but now I can really see it happening.
I think my primary job, one of the primary things I have to do is be the storyteller in our mission. And so to be able to see what God's doing around the world and to be a reteller of that story is critical. And that's what recognizing the story is better than I could have imagined. And that's what I'm getting to see over the last few weeks.
I'm sure we're going to hear some of those stories today, and many others could be told, but it's great to be able to have the opportunity to really bring some of these ideas to life together today.
David, so we get the honor of talking to you, the Teach Beyond president. And so I'm going to ask kind of the basic question, which is not really basic, it's profound, but it's a question people, I think, within Teach Beyond get asked a lot. And that is, why education? So we are a mission organization. We say we're a mission organization, but we do education. So how do those connect? What's the what's the purpose that we focus on education?
Ken, I'm a child of, well, I was born in the 80s, but really the 90s were my years. I remember very distinctly coming to the end of the 90s and hearing about this thing called Y2K. And if you don't know what that is, pause the podcast and just read about the wild days of Y2K and what was going on there. But I remember very distinctly thinking that we were almost done the Great Commission. And there was this like moment at the end of the 90s where it was like 2000s coming. This is the moment where everything is going to tie together. I think we just had that sort of sense that there was something as we turned to a new millennium. It was going to be something significant. It was, of course, but it wasn't the moment in which the Great Commission had been accomplished. And so it was surprising for in my life that 15 years later, we were really on mission halfway around the world, and I started to recognize that we're not at that moment where the Great Commission is to have been already accomplished. But and I think the shock for me in particular was seeing that so much work is left. Today, we have more people that have not heard the gospel than in any other point in history. So it's 1 in 3 people have not really meaningfully heard the gospel, and that is kind of shocking, actually, for a kid that grew up in the 90s, that that's the truth. And we would see that in addition to that reality, we see that there's actually more places that are more difficult to get to in terms of having the gospel effectively heard. We talk about this in our mission at Teach Beyond about creative access and about being in places in which sort of the traditional pathways to do mission to have the gospel heard are closing. And in our estimation, we would say about 45% of the world's population lives in a place where the gospel cannot sort of freely be heard. And if that's the case, the question for us as a mission is how will this gospel be heard by this 1/3 of the population that isn't hearing the gospel? And if if that's our question, and we now realize that a majority of those people are in creative access solutions, how do we do that? That's how we ended up in education. We asked that question: how will this next generation most effectively hear the gospel? That's the like kind of question that resonated in our minds, I think, as a mission as we started thinking about why education. It wasn't because we loved education, although that was part of the answer. It was actually asking a much more foundational question to the Great Commission. How will this next generation most effectively hear the gospel? If more people today have not heard the gospel than any other point in history, we have to take a new approach. We have to think about this and ask the Lord, where are you moving? And we'll talk about that in a few minutes.
I think it's really natural to be overwhelmed by statistics like 1 in 3 people haven't heard the gospel, or there's more people today than ever before who haven't heard it. Like, it's actually a good thing for us to feel the gravity of those statistics, and to realize there's this big crisis and need in the world today. So, can you talk a little bit more about how education plays into that and into that current situation?
Yeah, I think to start with, I would say something that is so helpful for us to remember, and that is that the gospel is not information. If it was just about information, we would have accomplished what the Lord had in front of us. But he knows that Christ, when he told his disciples to go, he didn't say write letters. He didn't say, pass on this story that I told to you by just sort of copying that information and have somebody else read it to someone else. He said, go and live out what you've seen to actually be the gospel in real life in somebody's life. That's what we're talking about. And so when we think about sort of the foundation, the starting point to respond to this, it actually, interestingly enough, in the 21st century, is still about presence. It is about being in relationship with somebody that is living out the gospel in your situation. So, our first response has to be still like it was in the first century, to be goers, to be people that are going to be present in a context that needs to hear the gospel. I was just thinking about the many ways in which we've seen this happen in our mission in our world. When we served in Southeast Asia, we saw this time and time again. In one particular situation where we were praying about a particular city, we saw how God used in just a few months the obedience of four different people that came from all over the world to a specific place that birthed a ministry that we'd been praying about for 5 years, and we'd been praying and asking the Lord for it, and it just took four people to say yes. And then there was this flourishing moment where uh, a school was founded, and then a church was founded. It's this sort of remarkable story. I could go on for an hour about that specific story, but I'm just telling you, there's just time and time again, story after story, in which we see the simple obedience of people who are willing to be the goers and be the hands and feet of Jesus, recognizing that's actually how the gospel is going to be effectively heard, fundamentally by people living it out and people seeing the gospel lived out in their context.
Mhm. It's so powerful to, yeah, being present, the actual physical body presence with people in communities. Um, and then thinking about how that even plays off into schools, where a school setting is a very unique setting. Education is a unique um, institution setting for people to be. So, how does that kind of invigorate, empower the presence that might be exist by just moving there? How does that all work together?
Yeah. Yeah. See, and this is the sweet spot for us, because it's not just about having presence. It actually is about this. Well, I'm going to use this word relevancy to sort of complement the presence. So it's if it's about presence, it also is about relevancy. It's not just being there, it's being there in a specific way. And I just want to say one more thing about the creative access context. This relevancy piece is key for that, because in a world in which um, digital authenticity is required, I often think about this that if you go search me up on Facebook or whatever, you can type in my name. I'm not hiding who I am anywhere. If I'm wherever I'm traveling, I think about this often in my multi-continent tour in the last few weeks. It's pretty evident in 10 seconds if you look up, hey, who is this person? They know what I'm doing. And for most of us, that's the case. So, this idea of relevancy is even more important in an age where digital authenticity is required. I remember sitting in a room at a security conference, and there were, I think there's 21 people at my table, and 20 of the 21 people were unsure of how they were going to actually physically get to the place that God had put on their heart to go. 20 of 21. And I put up the TeachBeyond flag and said, hey, you know what? In education, we have these remarkable things happening. And God's actually opening the doors in these places where it's hard to go to. And I would say in our context, relevancy is both opening the doors, and I think when we come back to that fundamental question, how is this next generation going to most effectively hear the gospel? It actually provides an invitation, which we'll talk about in a second, but it is really an invitation into a community. When I think the most poignant example of this in our context in Teach Beyond is that we are able in this moment to provide high quality Christian education in the heart of some of the most restricted context, Muslim context, for example, where we have parents saying to us, we're willing to risk our children becoming Christians because of the type of education you're providing. That is powerful. There is, and that's just one story of many in which we see how God is using a relevant need. That this is what we are thinking about, this desire for something to really impact this next generation. We are asked to do that. There's this relevancy to a real need. And it actually isn't just about, let's say, creative access context. It can also be, whole governments saying, we don't know what to do with these kids they have no education. That's on Teach Beyond's heart. We have this like mission for all. And if it's for all, How do we respond to those that are not able to write the email to our partnership team and say, hey, we need help. We want to reach this particular group. We need education because we don't have any. There's a whole group, there's 275 million of them, children that have no education, and that's on our heart. And so what does relevancy look like there? Well, we have whole programs designed to meet that particular need. And in education, suddenly we're being invited into a community that is saying, yes, we actually want our kids educated and we're willing to sacrifice. This is the crazy thing. We're willing to sacrifice economically because rather than having our kids work, we're going to have our kids go to school and see what can happen for this next generation. So there's not just um, this breaking of the poverty cycle, which we're of course advocates for and wanting to see that happen, but seeing the whole community transformed, parents transformed, and then that cascades into what we're asking God to do in individuals and communities around the world. So our heart for relevancy is one that led us to education. That's the point. It's because we're seeing how God is specifically in this moment using education as a way in which the gospel can be heard, really in places that we could never have imagined even a few years ago.
And, David, we're not talking about a certain type of curriculum. I sometimes get asked, like, okay, so what is it that you do in the education? And you're describing some pretty different learning environment in what you were just saying. And the point isn't, well, we do this and then out comes this. It's the experience of being loved and experiencing that transformation in the process of learning that looks so different in different places. So it's not that, oh, we're doing this and then we're going to have this outcome, but because of what is happening in that learning environment, whatever that looks like, there is that impact that is then, so appealing to families and communities.
We talk about transformational education. I think in a nutshell, we can actually say this so simply that it's this teaching learning process that invites all to respond to Christ's redemptive work in every aspect of life. And if you just think about that for a second, it's actually an invitation to an individual and community into a lifelong journey to becoming all that God intends. And so that demands us to go beyond a simple view of curriculum and saying, "Hey, this is the single view." It demands us to consider what Christian education might need to look like in a Muslim context. And if we do that well, if we're obedient to the thing that God's putting in front of us there, then maybe we will have parents saying, we're willing to risk our whole family being transformed. Risk is the word they use. Risk our whole family being transformed into something different because of the kind of education that is being provided. That kind of excellence, that kind of love and care. It was interesting in this particular context I'm thinking about. It was one of the parents pulled me aside and said, as it was more that I knew that my child was not going to be beaten, that my child was going to be cared for and that these teachers were going to love them. That was the thing that really stuck with me when I started to pick what school I'm going to send my child to. So, when we think about relevancy to God's mission, his what he's trying to do around the world, what he is doing around the world, suddenly we recognize, hey, God is actually using education in this moment to answer that first question I keep coming back to: how will this next generation most effectively hear
Mm-hmm.
the gospel?
And David, I've wrestled with that question and thinking about, well, there are lots of ways that we can share the gospel or that we can, have impact. It doesn't have to be education. And I think we would agree that it doesn't have to be education for everyone. We should be using our gifts and skills in the ways that God has wired us, in the opportunities he gives us. But there is a specific, unique opportunity for education, and we're being invited into that because of the great need. So do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, and I think like one of the things that should resonate on our hearts as followers of Jesus is a, a clear idea of what the Great Commission is, and it's the whole church bringing the whole gospel to the whole world. So if we start with that, the whole church bringing the whole gospel to the whole world, we would recognize that it is this God's using all of his people, all of the church to do his mission. And I think my charge to us as Teach Beyonders, but to those that are wondering, why education, it would be this. When we ask ourselves, how will we see this next generation hear the gospel most effectively? The word effective comes to my mind a lot. I keep coming into that. How will this stick and then expand and explode in this next generation? And we have seen evidence. We've been doing this now for 70 years, doing education for 70 years. We have seen evidence over our 70 years of doing this that God uses this particular generation that has experienced what we're talking about to be the leaders in the future that are the hands and feet, sort of seeing the gospel expand all over the world. We see this from our alumni of Black Forest Academy. We see this in the alumni of that school, that God is not just using um, this this group of people to have their lives transformed, but they are the people that have God's mission imprinted on their heart and want to be missional in the future. As I've talked to our people about why education, why do we end up here? It ended up being really about this profound moment where God is using in this moment education to spur on a future generation that cares about the Great Commission. And if that is on our hearts, if we share that vision, if we want to have another group of people like us that care about this great commission, this thing that God gave us 2,000 years ago to go do, to be his hands and feet, be his mission, if you will, then I can't think of something that is more effective in ensuring that that is exactly at the heart of the church in the future. And that's why we're so excited about what God is doing through education. And we do have a commitment. I think this is so important and kind of the final point. If we think about this commitment to presence and commitment to relevancy, our other commitment is to partner and recognize that this is at the heart of how missions will look like in the 21st century. And we use this kind of provocative word in our new vision, and that is to awaken the church. Now, I think the church is fully awake in some sense, but we also think there's a part of the church that needs to awaken to this opportunity in education to recognize that if we want a future generation of followers of Jesus that care deeply about the Great Commission, like we do today, that Christian education, the transformational education, needs to be at the heart of what the church is thinking about, needs to be at the heart of what God is doing. A couple years ago, we put some good sort of ideas in place and started to actually gather meaningful data on what this could look like. How many times are we being asked to partner? And we actually put up quite a few barriers. How many people still come through that funnel? And when I saw that result, that on average one partner requests some level of relationship with TeachBeyond every day. That's the crazy thing. One partner every day. And we can only respond to just a fraction of that because of the means that we have currently. I have now recognized in my own heart that this needs to be a movement of people that is committed to partnering with others. We sometimes say this in TeachBeyond, that we desire to join the work that God is already doing. And I remember this very distinctly when one of our senior leaders who came in at a leadership level said, well, how do we decide where to go to next? And the funny thing is, I had never thought about that question because we had never really asked that. It was so obvious that God was opening doors in new places. We never looked at a map and said, hey, where should we go next? It was always the obvious things that God was already doing and saying, hey, look, this is where I'm already doing work. Come, let's join me in the work that I'm already doing. And that's what God's saying to us all around the world. So it is, as we think about the importance of presence and relevancy, it must be grounded in a commitment to partnership with others. And that's sort of a foundational way in which I think we do mission at Teach Beyond.
Let's take a short break from our conversation with David.
We're talking today about reaching the nations with the hope of the gospel, using the tool of education. And there are so many ways to get involved. As you are hearing these stories, if you feel compelled to join, we'd love to invite you to take the next step.
You can visit teachbeyond.org or click on the link in the show notes to explore ways to get involved.
Now back to our conversation with David. I think it's so interesting as you're talking about all these partnerships. Sometimes as we get started, we can picture it's Western teachers going overseas and starting schools. But that's not the reality of kind of a majority of the Teach Beyond schools and projects and things that are going on. So, what does this look like as we go overseas? What are these projects? Like, who's running them? Who are they serving? How are they working within the communities?
This looks like expats serving across culturally and also looks like individuals reaching their own nation. One of my favorite moments was in the last year was when we were down in Uruguay and Argentina. And it was like a really interesting moment for me because usually you kind of get a theme and you say, "Oh, I went to this region and this is what I heard from the region." But it was so like starkly different between those two uh, countries. I thought this might illustrate what we're talking about, Kian. When we sat down in Argentina, we heard from our director there, and she was telling us about her heart for her country reaching Argentina through education. And she was telling us the fundamental thing that God was putting in front of her as the crisis, which is truly what it is, was that there's no Christian teachers in, or I should say, very few Christian teachers and very, very few qualified Christian teachers for the Christian schools that are everywhere. There's Christian schools everywhere. This is the crazy thing. In Argentina, they don't want more Christian schools because they're so poorly run. And why is that? Because they do not have qualified Christian teachers. So Marisol is telling us we're desperate for Christian teachers and we have to do something about that. So what does it look like, to your question, Kian? What does it actually look like in Argentina? Well, it actually looks like a teacher college because the crisis is really about no Christian teachers, qualified Christian teachers that are coming out ready to fill in the needs that are everywhere across the country. And we have Christian schools across the country that are just waiting for these teachers to graduate and that we can put them into these schools. And that's our heart in Argentina, that we would have a teacher college in every province. Okay. Then I'm doing it inverted, but we went previously to Uruguay. And in Uruguay, we were sitting there hearing about the fact that there are only Christian schools in the capital and that there are huge swaths of the whole country in which there's no Christian education, and hearing in the most secular country in Latin America that there are no Christian schools in these various contexts, and that the churches are suffering because of this. They're talking about how most churches are 10 people or less in Uruguay, and that's not an exaggeration. We're saying we have to do something as a body of believers to look at this. And in Uruguay, the question wasn't about teachers. They have lots of Christian teachers. It is about establishing a Christian school in every community of a certain size. And there's this vision for having a Christian school in every province. So these places are only like 300 miles apart and in the same region. And the mission looks like an Argentinian leading our team in Argentina, recognizing the crisis and opportunity in Argentina's for teachers. And Uruguay, just around the corner, if you will, is about seeing our team from Uruguay take the lead and say, it actually is about seeing Christian schools established in every province because not everyone is driving to the capital to drop their kids off for education. And we need to be walking alongside the church and in these various communities. I love that picture for us. First of all, it's seeing this is certainly, and I would say emphasize, in no way a Western driven mission, and certainly in no way a Western driven vision for where God's leading us. That's the first thing. And secondly, recognize that the expressions of an effective mission like Teach Beyond need to actually look differently. And we see that in this like very poignant example of these two countries that are side by side, and in some ways in a very similar way, needing so desperately to hear the gospel. The church is saying we need to walk alongside education in a new way. And we're now being invited to be a part of that process.
I hear what you're saying, David, that these individuals leading in their countries are saying, how can we reach our nation? And there's also this bigger statement of reaching the nations, and those go together. It's not one or the other, but the bigger vision of how can we see what God's doing, see the opportunities, and respond to those in meaningful ways so that the gospel can go forward in those contexts.
Reaching the nations through education gives us such a good common language to express our heart. it's interesting, like in just a second, what would my heart be for? It is that the nations are reached through the gospel. And how do we see that happening? It's through education. I think God's doing mission in so many different ways, and effectively in different ways in this moment. But I can't think of a place, a time in which we have seen, at least in my lifetime, where we're seeing more invitations to transform the next generation. So if we actually think that education is going to transform people, which we believe God is using education to transform people, and it certainly, I would say, does one way or the other. And if we're being asked to be a part of that, um, I, I then can say, I think with real confidence, I think we can say with real confidence that we think of that word effective. Why education? Why is it the effective way? Well, we're being asked, literally being asked to shape the next generation. That's that gives it, even now when I say that, I kind of have like hairs on the back of my head standing up saying, this is the thing that God is putting in front of us. An invitation from hundreds every year to say, come help us shape the next generation so that they can be the followers of Jesus that love the Great Commission like you do. And it's not just, as Kian said, it's not just about the Westerner going halfway around the world, although that's a part of the story. It also is about this this movement from all corners of the earth seeking to reach their nation so that the nations can be reached through education. So, when we think back to that original question, how will this next generation most effectively hear the gospel? You can see how it led us to education. It's a response that is fueled by this presence, it's fueled by relevancy, it's fueled by partnership. And when we package that together and say, how does that all look? What will this look like then? It has led us to this reality that education is the way in which we're seeing this next generation most effectively hear the gospel. And when we think about this, we recognize that the world's crisis is always an opportunity for the gospel. And this is the moment that he's bringing us to in Teach Beyond, a moment in which doors are opening around the world, where we have people saying, God is opening the door for my nation to be reached through education. And when we do this together, it sounds like this: reaching the nations through education.
David, thank you so much for coming. It is so inspiring, encouraging to kind of hear this, and just this is what we do every day, but being able to hear it kind of laid out is so powerful and encouraging as we talk about it and realize just the opportunity that there is to step into that, to join that, um, in so many different ways. There's so many opportunities to get involved. Um, so thank you, David, in the midst of all of this storytelling that you are doing and sharing what's going on. Thank you for joining us. Before we let you go, we always ask our guests, what's one thing that's changing your life? So this can be something big or small. You're free to kind of take it where you want to go. So I'll go first, and then you get a little bit of time to think about it. But what's changing my life is in our team, in communications, in Teach Beyond. We've had a number of new people joining, which is always fun. I always love new people, getting to know new people. And the thing that really brings it out is we've done so many icebreaker games, getting to know you games in our team, that it kind of draws attention, like, oh, we have a new person this week, another new person this week. So it's been really fun to get to know these new people who are stepping up and kind of joining our team.
That's so good. I feel like we need to pull in some of those icebreaker questions into maybe
Yeah.
some future episodes. So we'll have to revisit that.
Perfect.
Fair warning. We need
What's been
fair warning.
changing? Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
That's just Kian and I will warm up with those. We won't spring those on a guest. Well, what's been changing my life lately is just in the midst of a lot of different projects and things that are really time sensitive. There's been a lot going on. I have found that there's two different worship songs that kind of have a phrase similar of Jesus be the center or Jesus at the center. And it's been really helpful when I'm feeling really stressed about something to just take a quick pause, either sing that out or play the song on my phone or something and just recenter. Literally saying, Jesus, you're at the center of this. I don't want this to be about literally the, task at hand, but ultimately about you. And I found that reframe to just be really helpful in the midst of the flurry of things to do, to just stay centered on that. And honestly, I think that could be said in the context of this conversation too, that all
Mhm.
of this is with Jesus at the center. So we want to just keep reframing back to that. So that's been changing my life lately. A small thing, but it's a big thing too. What about you, David?
I couldn't get it down to 1, so I'm cheating. I'm giving you just
Mm,
sort of
yeah.
2 things. Is that do guess I've
Yes.
heard that before. Maybe a guess gives you
We'll
2.
allow it.
Um,
Yes.
no, okay, okay. Well, melatonin has been my friend because I'm trying to, like, learn how to sleep properly,
Yes.
but, I found a long release, like, so it gives you a second shot, like, it takes longer to digest, so it's helping me a
Okay.
little bit through the various, ups and downs of, various places I'm
The
trying to
time
sleep,
zone
and
changes and
yeah, 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 and trying it on planes and things like that. And, so that's helpful. But, what's interesting is because, often it's like getting off the plane, I'm speaking in a few hours. I have been looking for a good way in which I can have my notes, with me without bringing another, device along and or printing everything off because often I am working on the plane while I'm there to go speak. So, the beauty is I have something called the Fold, which is these, like, devices that open up into a little mini tablet. And, that's all fun. You think you can play games on it. I don't think I'm sure it does play games, but what it does for me is I can load my PowerPoint and my notes on here in a way that I can see, and all my stuff is right in front of me, and it's beautiful, and I can speak in all the different places that I need to speak, and I have my PowerPoints loaded and my notes, and it does it side by side. So it is changing my life because I come up, look, I don't have any notes, and I just pull this thing out and it opens. But anyway, it has
Mm.
really been a cool moment of using something new in my life, technology to help me do something I'm doing all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you need a tool that helps you to be able to just start talking about something and certainly what we've been talking about today is on the tip of your tongue because you're talking about this all the time, but there are different audiences, different people we're talking to, and so that's great that you have that readily available. And we're just so thankful for the chance to talk with you today and be able to share more about reaching the nations through education and how this is playing out around the world through this conversation. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
David, Heather, and I serve with TeachBeyond, a mission organization reaching the nations through education.
Want to learn more and get involved? Visit teachbeyond.org or follow us on social media.
To help more people find the podcast and hear about TeachBeyond, we'd love it if you would leave a rating or review and share this show with a friend. Be sure you're subscribed or following the show on the platform where you listen so you never miss an episode.
And as always, you can reach us at podcast@teachbeyond.org. We'll see you next week.